to what version 3 says about different types of levels of service catalog.
I think, and this approach here with that we have still on the screen, I think, because it's approaching it in a project in a pragmatic manner, a planned manner, if you like, then it certainly addresses the issue of service portfolio management, because we're able to put into place the things that allow us to identify new services and when services are going to be retired. So we're approaching it from a pragmatic and project approach rather than just throwing things in and seeing what happens type of approach. So I think that's part of it in terms of the version 3. The next slide then really, I guess, in many ways relates to that previous question, because one of the first things that we do in Axios is we like to run what we call the Service Catalog Strategy Workshop. And really this is a one-day exercise which takes organizations from a standing start in service catalogs to some practical action. So at the end of the day, they will have a good understanding of the service catalog concepts and practicalities, and also have started to define some of their business services. So it's a day where the morning take is very much an educational session, and in the afternoon we run a practical session to get organizations to start thinking about how it fits within their organization. We also talk there about the things like the barriers that there might well be in implementing service level or service catalogs within the organization. And there's many benefits to doing this, we've found. From an education perspective, it allows us to establish a common terminology so everyone's talking the same language, which is always beneficial. And I think, again, by involving people, by making them actually feel that they're part of the process, they're more inclined to embrace the challenge and want to move things forward. It's always one of the difficulties in any project is changing people, because people fundamentally don't like to change. But making them feel part of the process helps them feel that they want to take things forward. It also helps us, this work also helps us to start to establish the benefits that a service catalog can realize for an organization. And it also starts to show that the initiative, the workshops, the catalog itself is supported by senior staff. It's very important that senior staff support this and the seniors support this. And again, one of the things that often come out of this workshop is it allows the objectives for the service catalog to start to be agreed as well. So what are we going to be doing? How long is it going to be taking? Who's involved? This workshop can start to pull all of this information out.
Okay, so we're on the next question, which is very much about how we design and structure our services. This is something that's a particular pet of mine, and in fact it's that we have a service catalog blog, and the recent entry in that is all about the quality of what organizations generally have in their service level management documentation. Do you think your documents reflect the IT processes or the business processes as required? Are they aligned? Do they talk the language of the organization, or are they simply IT documents? Yeah, fairly broad spread of answers there. The biggest one is still mostly unaligned. So we've got 55% that are unaligned in some way, and the rest that are saying, well, a little bit aligned. I think the experience very much is that in IT we tend to either go into defensive mode and try and write contracts for SLAs, or we suddenly decide we're going to be attorneys for a day and start writing legal documents, and nobody's interested in either of these two. Okay. So we've talked about the workshop. The workshop, of course, is something that's available from Axios, but that's something that any organization could conceivably do themselves. I think it's a great exercise to do. It doesn't take long, gets everybody on the same page. So how do we then move on? We talked about the ITIL version 3 method. That's the strategy part. How do we then move on to service design?
Okay, the next slide then looks at the basic approach to implementation that we perform at Axios. The first part is the part we just talked about, the strategy workshop, the education, the getting the buy-in, making people understand what we're actually trying to achieve by the introduction of a a service catalog. The second part then, the design, workshop and build, really is where we start to take some of the ideas and some of the decisions made during the strategy workshop, and we start to look at putting them into the product or tools that we'll be using to support that service catalog. So we need to get the data there, we need to understand how it's going to be structured in the products and the tools, and we need to start thinking about what data will actually be included in the tools as well. So that's what that design workshop is about. Not so much strategy, but more about practical building and getting the thing ready for use. There's probably going to be some training involved, whether it's a case of training in processes, because we've not done service level management before, whether it's training in the product itself so people can start to use the product to build and amend and manage those services. There will be some level of training there as well. Then we start building the services in the service catalog. So by this stage, we've got a good understanding of what we're trying to achieve, how it's going to look in the product. Everyone's aware of the processes and the tools. And then we start to build it in the tool or whatever method we're actually using or creating this service catalog. Many organizations still have things in spreadsheets, which works, but we should be using technology to help us ease this process and make it better for us. And then once we've been through all those parts, the publish and review, where we actually publish the service catalog and start the review mechanism to make sure it's still valid on an ongoing basis. The design workshop we talked about there, the second part of that implementation approach, this is the type of thing that we, or Axios, include in that workshop. So we have a number of considerations that we need to think about. We need to think about which services are we going to include in the service catalog at this point. We don't have to do everything at once. Some people would say that you won't be able to do everything at once, depending on the size of your organization. But certainly it's good advice to maybe think about using simple services, friendly services, or new services to help get you into that process of the development of the service catalog. We also need to think about the structure of those services, and here we're talking about how we group them so that they're going to be easy to maintain and they're going to be easy for the end users to find and use. You know, if you look at something like Amazon, it's very easy to use, and we've got to look at something similar for the services that we provide. It's nice and easy, it's intuitive, there's no training for the users required, they can just use it straight away. We need to also think about the types of data to be included here as well. So what types of data are we going to include against the services and service offerings? There's a number of bits of information we could include, like descriptions, service level agreements, the availability of services, who are the owners, costs, configuration items, a whole raft of information we can include, but we need to decide here which of that data is actually going to be included. We also need to understand where the data exists. Many organizations have most of this data, maybe in lots of different places, but they already have most of this data. So it's a case of finding out where that data is and making sure we have access to it and we can pull that into whatever tool or product we actually need. We need to think about the visibility as well. We need to think about which services and which service offerings are going to be visible to different parts of the business. HR applications, for example, may only be visible to the HR department. So we need to identify who can see what effectively in a service catalog. We also need to determine the reporting requirements. Again, mentioned earlier, understanding the management information reporting requirements is critical because we need to know what information to pull out to help us, to inform us, to take this forward and to allow us review the process and the services that we're offering. And we need to think about data maintenance as well. We've got a certain amount of information here. Who's going to maintain that as we actually go through the life cycle of the services? So what do we need when we look at this workshop? Well, we've talked about some of this already. The service information, we need to collect that. We need to find out where that is and start to collect all that information. We also need to think about service dependency information as well, so we can start to identify the infrastructure that supports the services and the services that support other services. We talked about this earlier, so that we can start to put together a map of all the things that go together to support and provide the services we offer to our customers. From a service offering perspective, the things we need to think about then perhaps are custom form requirements. If the service offering is a request, the user can go into an intranet or a website and request things on. There may well be different requirements for different offerings, so we may need custom forms to support that. And what about workflows as well? So when a request is made, what happens to it? Does it follow a process workflow that will allocate the work to the appropriate teams and the appropriate people in the correct order? The technical catalog information here really is when we start to step down into the lower level infrastructure to identify all the kit and the characteristics of that kit that we need to have in our services. And finally, user updates. Your users change all the time. The visibility for those users will change all the time. We need to make sure that we're able to capture those changes and updates so that the services are still appropriate for the business and the right users. Next slide then really shows from a product perspective the types of things we're looking at. The first slide there on the left-hand side is showing the tree view of the services, the associated service offerings. And then if we look there for the mobile phone there, we have a number of offerings under that, Apple iPhone for example. And then below that we have the telephony service, which is our link into the CMDB. So the telephony service is actually a system, and below that system we have the individual CIs that go to support that system and the mobile phone service. So we can see there the join between the service catalog and the CMDB. When we're creating the services and the service offerings themselves, then we really look to the product to help us, to drive us through the creation of those services. So we've got an example here of a BlackBerry service offering. And you can see on this we've got an amount of information about the description of the service offering, the detailed description which gives us some more information. It also talks about custom forms which we mentioned about, and even the status there as well. So we can see this is actually currently live as a catalog service. Other information that we will want to store are things like service level agreements, for example. So here we have a screen that shows us information about the service level associated with this offering. So we get descriptions about the service level, and at the bottom there we get the availability hours. So it shows us when that service offering will actually be provided for us. Other information that are very important that we covered earlier are costs. So here we have an example of the different types of cost associated with this service offering. So we can actually add them up and get a total cost there for this service offering. And also we have the ability here to put in the price as well, the price that we may want to charge the business if they want to request this offering. Not all organizations charge for their services, but if they do, they need this information. And again, showing about demonstrating value, you can start to show what it's cost us to provide the service, and that's why we charge this particular price. And the final part of the forms here is the visibility. And here we can see, for example, that this service offering, because it's a top-range BlackBerry, is only available to the senior management. So again, this is what we talked about during the design workshop, identifying the visibility rules. And in the product, we should be able to say, this service offering is only available to certain people.
How we actually build the structure of our catalogue, and just takes us nicely into this slide, but particularly in terms of how we would define these different categories and different levels. And I think one of the things here is that there's no absolute way of doing this. We've defined our own approach to it, which we think is a good one, but that can be modified. But maybe if you want to talk through this one a little bit now, Brian, and just explain how we came to come up with this kind of structure.
Yes, it's a very good question, and certainly we've worked with a number of organizations looking at the structure of their service catalog. And as Barclay said, there is no hard and fast rule here. There is no way it says this is right and this is wrong. There are a number of ways of doing this.